Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Altitude. I am your host, of course, Woody Woodworth. We have an exceptional show today for you with an exceptional guest. I would like to welcome Doug Merritt, CEO of Aviatrix, to the show. Doug, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Woody. I'm excited to be here. I've been listening to you since before I joined Aviatrix. I love this podcast. I'm so glad that you and Aviatrix kicked this whole thing off, and I'm honored to be a guest.
Awesome. So many questions I have for you, and I know we only have about 35 minutes, but I think we can cover a lot of ground on today's show. So where are you calling from, by the way? Are you in Austin, or your background looks a little different?
It's a little bit different. Yeah, as you know, and as the listeners would guess, I get to travel quite a bit with this job. So I live in Austin. Right now, I'm up in Idaho. We tried to escape the heat of Austin, but it turns out it's 100 degrees up in Idaho also. But it's beautiful up here. But in the past 3 weeks, I've been in the Bay Area. I've been in New York. I've been all over the place. So it's always good to ask because sometimes I don't even know where I am.
Yeah, right. Where is Doug Merritt? It's like, where's Waldo? You got to find him. So are you there on vacation? Am I interrupting like some of your family time? I hope not.
No. It's a work week. So I'm fully tuned in on work.
That's cool. I remember during 2020, of course, COVID, we learned after doing some research that with testing and proper certification with the government of Hawaii, you could actually fly into Hawaii and avoid quarantine. And so we did this as a family. We all got tested. We submitted our test results. It was like 72 hours before you go. And we got signed off by the state of Hawaii. Yep. And we just decided to hang out there. We were on the Big Island for like 6 weeks because we had been bottled up in our house, for months and months and months. 10 months or something.
Yeah.
And it was like a vacation, but I was working at the same time. So it was super cool. It was my first taste of being able to really experience remote work at its finest.
Yes.
So it's really nice.
It's crazy because remote work has been something that we've been experimenting with, certainly in jobs where you don't physically have to work machinery or be in contact with patients or be a first responder. Like there are many people that just don't have this opportunity. But in jobs like ours, we've been talking about it. I've been reading papers about it since college, since like the 80s and 90s and telework. But we didn't really get to, it was spotty where it was implemented. And it was fascinating to see COVID where the majority of tech in a lot of these jobs went remote. And there's huge benefit in being face-to-face. And I think we've lost a little bit because of some of the lack of face-to-face, but it's unbelievable how productive people were and how we didn't miss a beat. Like the first week or two of COVID, I thought the world was going to melt down as everybody went back to their homes. And we obviously saw the world didn't melt down. There's a lot of hardship and a lot of issues everyone dealt with. But what we do in our world with technology and networking is certainly the foundational element to it. I can't imagine what it would have been like in the early 1900s when influenza hit and we had our last big shelter in place before all this technology. But it definitely was very different in 2020.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely game changing and changed the state of networking and cloud in our whole industry, right? COVID was one of those watershed moments, both, of course, for terrible, tragic events. It was very sad and unfortunate and a tragedy for many families. But regardless, we turned a page kind of on how we think about work, how we think about mobility, and of course, how all of our productivity and applications are going to work. And the cloud really became, if it was already a rising star, but of course, at that point, it was a massive influx of new workloads, new applications, and of course, the network to connect it all. Which leads us, of course, to Aviatrix, why we're here to connect the world and increase productivity and modernize the network for the application space. Which leads me to my next question, which is, of course, I was in New York City for the big kickoff event on the orange carpet in front of the NASDAQ board. That was super fun. We had a drum line and the whole bit. It felt like, we were putting our business suit on kind of for the first time. It's my tenure at Aviatrix where we were getting very serious about who we are as a company and the message we want to convey to the public about our value and what we're doing. And I remember seeing on the big NASDAQ board, of course, scrolling across, there were many cool things. But I saw this one thing that got my attention, which is that the network is the cloud. which of course dovetails into this whole thing about cloud being huge and COVID transforming our world and the network being the underpinning of all of this transformation. So can you unpack that term for me a little bit? It's a great term, but I feel like there's more to it than just that.
Yeah, it is. The difficulty with positioning and statements is, one, how do you make it intriguing enough for people to stop? It's like, what do you mean by that, really? And I feel the network as a cloud is one of those where it's like, really? So like, let's unpack that. What do you mean? But they only work if there's truth to them, if there's legitimacy and authenticity around it. And I think what I certainly have experienced over 12, 15 years of, actually probably even more. When I was at SAP, we put our first workloads in the AWS cloud back in 2008 and 9, when it really was EC2 and S3. It wasn't everything that AWS was today. So I've been fortunate enough with a startup that I co-founded in the mid-90s of making a cloud application, way before it's called cloud, but making an application that was trying to serve HR and workforce around the world that was hosted, dealing with cloud for a long time. And the movement, the way that I've experienced it, is the cloud vendors did an incredible job, AWS at the forefront, and then Microsoft and Google and others quickly following suit, in revolutionizing the way that we've been thinking about technology. The initial promise was it's going to simplify everything, right? We'll take care of everything for you. And I think the concept was you probably only need one set of data centers. You need one provider, and it would be way easier than the complexity of the data centers we were used to. Okay, I'm not sure we would call them last generation data centers, but the data centers had all been reliant on. And I think there was a lot of truth to that, a lot of benefit of you can get the power of efficient and shared infrastructure that's architected completely differently. It's microservices oriented, it's horizontal scale out, it's always on, it's always available. Some of the elements that we were trying to do with virtualization and trying to do with software-defined networking and other things in 2008 to 2018, but they evangelized a whole different architecture. But what I think we've all found is, one, the complexity is as large or maybe even larger than it was in our data centers. There's a lot of moving pieces within each one of these clouds. So it didn't necessarily simplify the environment. And most companies are not able to centralize everything they need around one vendor. So not only do you have a very complex architecture that each of the clouds are proposing, but you're mixing a bunch of different, your last generation data centers, a bunch of edge and next generation data centers that maybe Equinix or Megaport or somebody else is evangelizing, plus these clouds, the AWS, Azure, GCP clouds, et cetera. And the element that I feel actually ties them all together, right? It's all really, really well developed and beautiful infrastructure, is the actual network itself. Now, if you really want to take advantage of these many pools of next generation infrastructure, the network is the piece that ties them effectively together. And I think there's a couple of different messages that we're trying to convey. One, to really provide the portability and the flexibility and the scale and capability that you need. You need some independence in the networking layer. You're only as flexible as the lower layers of the infrastructure. Networking, compute, and storage are three of those lower levels. And two, as much as the cloud vendors worked very hard to say everything is going to be just about the developer, and we're going to stop all the friction that the infrastructure teams and the networking teams and the other supporting elements of development kind of got in the way of developers. Developers just do whatever you want to do. Most customers have found, I think, in 23, 24, 25, as we're going into 25 in the future, is you can't get rid of all that complexity. Is right. You need one, hopefully you need a set of abstraction layers across some of those low layer infrastructure elements to really get what you want out of these clouds, these multiple data centers that exist globally right now. But two, you need visibility, you need a degree of control, you need cost optimization. People within your organization need to have their hands at the controls of the different layers if you really, really, really want to operate these very complex apps, these complex landscapes, the way that businesses and their customers are demanding. So ultimately,
exactly.
Get what you want. The network becomes one of the most important primary elements of bringing all the value of these different clouds to life.
Yeah, I want to hone in on something really important you said earlier, which was that when cloud was first invented, of course, as we all know, it was very application and developer centric to
Yes.
provide for them an environment where they were kind of free of the process, if you will, of
Yes.
IT, right?
Yeah.
And some people would say handcuffs, depends on where you are in that continuum. And it was meant to be this kind of sense of freedom and agility. And it turns out that while that worked for a small handful of specialized applications, when you really started moving business critical workloads, big things, heritage things, as I call them, to the cloud, either refactoring them end to end or existing in perpetuity as a hybrid stance, all of that IT stuff came back.
Yep.
Of those IT things, the networking, I think, is the most critical for cloud because exactly it's always a mixed bag. There are going to be instances where you can deploy a very simple application in one private network like a VPC and have it self-sustain and self-live and just feed off, different cloud services, serverless things, managed databases. But that is the exception to the rule. What ends up happening is that applications end up being way more complicated, even in the cloud, than I think the cloud providers anticipated.
Yep.
And thus you need security, you need connectivity. People wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to phone home back to the data center. So the model that ended up emerging ended up being very heterogeneous. And
Yeah.
when you talk about, see if I can do this word, heterogeneity, my God, what a mouthful. When you talk about mixed environments, the networking is, in my opinion, the most critical piece because it's network or nowhere.
Yep.
To me, that's why that statement is so powerful and resonates with me. I think it also shines a bright light on just the importance of networking as a whole and how hard network professionals kind of work day in, day out in this grind to keep the world running. But, this is, again, playing a little bit of a stereotype, but, they don't really ever get the spotlight.
Right.
And there's a lot of people in IT that are there, storage people and security people. And so, the infrastructure people, I'm not trying to just circle out networking, but from the IT perspective, sometimes I think it feels like the developers and the application owners are the rock stars and they're coming out with all this cool code and innovations, but none of it works without the infra behind it.
And that the two sub themes that we are jumping up and down about and trying our best to help the world with underneath the network as the cloud is to really make those teams that get a little bit more of the visibility, the applications teams and others, to really make that all work. We need to make networking cool again. It was bypassed largely, and you had a bunch of really talented network engineers that were trying their best, throwing their bodies in front of the train. It's like, hey, slow down a little bit. Like, I know you want to go fast, but you really, really want to make sure that you have effective connectivity, that you can trace what's happening at the network layer, that you can manage your sub 100 millisecond connection times or response times, and things really matter. Details matter in the networking world. And so trying to elevate that networking group again that has been disassembled as people went really quickly to cloud. They tried to move away from those people that were slowing things down, which again, great first movement. Empower the developers, go super quickly. We want to take advantage of this. But one of those supporting themes is make networking cool again. And the second is the networking teams that are slowly becoming empowered again. How do we really elevate them as the heroes within this IT landscape? Because as you said, Woody, if network is not working, we affectionately refer to it here as a ring zero activity, nothing works. Nothing works. And it's not just one application that goes down. It depends on how you've configured your landscape, but it is the blast radius, as you all keep saying since I walked in the door. A blast radius of networking is extensive. And by the nature of the term, you've got a bunch of different things that are all connected together. And so the network has got to be up. It's got to be performant. It's got to be controllable. It's got to be visible. It's got to be cost efficient. It has to be ubiquitous. And so how do we make networking cool again? How do we make those network engineers that are fighting every single day to try and make the rest of the org aware of some of the complexities that it's not their job to really know, but they better be aware that they've got to empower the people that do have that knowledge so that everything else that we want as we're moving to this constantly online world, that it actually works. So the network is a cloud. To do that, you got to make networking cool again. And the people that are fighting every single day to make sure that that network works are the heroes, need to be recognized as greater heroes within the IT landscape.
Mm-hmm. I would almost say, for first of all, for IT people and networking people, I think make networking cool again really resonates, because there was a time when data centers were first being built back in the early 90s when it was really cool to be, I mean, it's always been cool to be networking.
Yeah, but it
Listen
really
to me, but that was like the coolest thing, right?
was.
And then, yeah. Although I would also say, I think there's a broader appetite for just making networking cool.
Yeah.
Not again, just evangelizing the fact that, so if you're talking interlead IT people, of course, it's cool. We want it to be cool again. I think if you're talking to some folks, executives and application owners and people that are more focused on the line of business, and I've talked about this on the show a great deal, which is that we really do need to raise the consciousness of the importance of networking in the mind of the executive, right? It's not like a byline or an afterthought, but I don't think there's always a connection on the importance of networking and how, if you design it incorrectly, or if you don't take a modern approach, your business is going to suffer. And I think that some executives just broadly look for other areas to invest in and improve in the hopes that it drives change for their business and application, but overlook the importance of networking.
I agree. And I think that we have a responsibility, and we're trying to step into that a little bit more aggressively here and going forward, of helping the networking teams tie together those critical business initiatives that the other parts of the organization may not tie with networking, tie those business initiatives to the impact the networking can have on those business initiatives. And a really simple example that we've been talking a lot about, we'll be talking a little bit more concretely about, is there's a lot of organizations that are pretty dependent on mergers and acquisitions for their growth and to serve their customers. And something as simple as what is going to prevent the acceleration of this critical organization that you spend a ton of money and research and time to bring together with your company? What's one of the things that prevents getting that value? Well, the network turns out to be either a accelerant or an impediment. And you can tie things like IP overlap as one of many examples that the core networking team has got to resolve, because you've got this other company that's becoming part of your company. And the way that networking is organized, there's not enough IP addresses for everybody. So if you really want to integrate that organization with your organization, there's a lot of low-level work that needs to be done. And something like Aviatrix and the toolings that we've created in the cloud can radically change from months or weeks down to hours or days, how you can integrate new companies under an M&A guise becomes super business relevant. Like, there are promises that shareholders have been made. There are promises that customers have been made. There's huge amount of expense in trying to integrate these companies, and we can help be a meaningful driver for the networking teams within those organizations to meet those business goals. But our job, I think, is to really go critical business function by critical business function and go deep with our prospects and customers to tie together the material return on investment and business accelerants that networking can provide, so that we can make us more relevant to those business initiatives and not just live down at the networking layer.
Yeah, it's kind of like the rising tide raises all ships to me, that when you lift your networking, you lift a business, and then you lift a lot of other things that you may not expect. You lift security, you lift efficiency, you lift reliability, you lift agility. It's this great enabler.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm a big proponent of that approach.
It has network effects.
Yeah. Oh, good one. Along those lines, I dwell on the topic of network modernization on this show quite a bit. I'm kind of a fiend for it, because I really think that we're at a place in our industry with the technology we have where we can create a revolution in the way people think about networking and the way they approach it and the way they build it, develop it, sustain it, right? It's partly automation driven. If you've been a fan of the show or just a regular listener, we talk about that a lot.
Yep.
A lot of it is getting closer to developers. So dev, net ops, and embracing a shift left approach. But in my opinion, and there's more to it than that. Embedding security in the network has been a huge topic we've talked about with many different experts and guests on the show. So there's all these facets and angles to it. I'm just interested on your take of all of those things. It could be security, it could be deployment, it could be scale, it could be design of modernizing the network. Which facet do you think is the most important? Or is it just not that simple?
Depending on the business initiative, there are probably different elements of that landscape that you'd emphasize. But ultimately, I feel like it's a combination of all of them. And it's not a new message. Software-defined networking evolved in 2007, 8, 9. We've been talking about it for a really long time, that the way that the last generation data centers were built, they were very hardware dependent for the different networking devices. So you had a accumulation of different specialty purpose boxes, routing and switching and NATing and VPNing and DNSing and firewalling and load balancing, and that were necessary to be strung together, but they were independent. And SDN's attempt was those should be much more aggregated. They should be much more integrated. Networking is one thing, and the network should be scalable. It should be performant. It should be natively secure. And it's difficult when you have all these bolt-ons trying to come together to do those different tasks. What I found fascinating as we redeveloped Splunk, which was my last role, from an on-premise solution to a horizontally scalable cloud solution, was how complex networking still was within the CSP environment, that the majority of those CSP services were relatively independent, much like they were in those last generation data centers. One of the many things that drew me to Aviatrix is we've carried our roots from a lot of people here that were part of the Nicera and NSX and other SDN movements to really bring that software-defined networking, that integrated and amalgamated approach to the networking offering that we have, so that you can ideally get all those different components that you just quickly rattled through, Woody. That should be part of your modernized network. And we obviously lean heavily on infrastructure as code here, and how we make it our solution a seamless element of how you provision all your different systems. But it's not just the infrastructure as code movement. It's what are the different services that exist across the platform that we have. And the trick is always you want to be able to bring those independent services to life independently if necessary, because not every company wants to reimagine their entire network. So where are you going to start, and how over time are you going to get to this wonderful platform that integrates all these different components? So heterogeneity is tough. We've got to be heterogeneous across our own offerings, right? How do you mix and match what we have, and where do you start and where do you end? But we also have to be heterogeneous with the different offerings that might already exist that you lean on as a customer and that exist within the CSP environments. But ultimately, I think what you all have been advocating for a long time, well before I got here a year ago, was there is a journey, and we're trying to get to the destination of modernized and really well-mannered networking layer that isn't resident in one cloud. It spans all the different deployments that you need, the multiple clouds you deal with, multiple edge providers, and your data centers you're still trying to tie in. And we're still very focused and very excited about that destination. We just continue to experiment with what is the best way to get a customer started on the journey. What's the first use case, and then the second, and then the third, that over time leads to where some of our more prolific customers are, where they really are leveraging that full stack of capability in a truly modernized networking environment.
Yeah, a couple things I want to unpack there. And I think the broad takeaway in what you said is, if you start to look at networking as a software-defined system, as a platform that integrates multiple capabilities holistically, you begin to arrive at a foundation that then enables you to tackle some of those other facets or challenges I was talking about. So scale and security and scalability. Well, I already mentioned scale.
Yeah.
And agility and reliability. Yeah. The illities, as sometimes you call them. I agree. I think a great analogy maybe for some of our listeners who might feel like we're out on Mars or something with this conversation, just to pull it back in a little bit, would be to think about the evolution of building buildings, the evolution of architecture, the evolution of construction, going from brick to stone to more modern materials like steel, aluminum. When you change the foundational elements that you're using to blueprint with and build with, it enables a completely different kind of outcome. So buildings can get taller. It's faster and cheaper to build them. They're more energy efficient. You get better places to work and live, right?
Yeah.
It changes just that one fundamental idea of changing the raw materials to more effective modern things yields an exponential knock-on effect in what you can do end to end. I don't know if that made sense, but that's how it works in my mind.
That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. And if we use just a super pedantic example that goes with your building approach, where I feel that we differentiate pretty dramatically is because of the approach that the cloud vendors took with networking. Those modern materials don't always exist. So a lot of the networking constructs within the clouds are really opaque on purpose because the message was, we manage it for you. Like, don't worry about this. Developers, we take care of all that low level stuff for you. And if you get in and try and muck with it too much, there's all kinds of problems that you'll create that you're not even aware of that are going to really hamper your freedom of getting away from those processes. So you wind up with a whole set of services that you can't really see or touch or manipulate or even investigate at the level that you need to, which makes a pretty brittle and challenging building. As long as a big storm doesn't come along, or you don't want to reconfigure anything in the building, or it probably works, and maybe you were able to build it pretty quickly. But that's not the way that most of our offices or houses are really constructed. So there's a pretty big compare contrast in the way that we are helping organizations, both with speed and agility, but then also with control and visibility and security and cost, that by the nature of the way many of these other services were architected, they just can't deliver. They can't deliver at this point in time. Network as a cloud, again, is a high level call to action of it. The network is so important to what you're trying to do with your online presence, your online business initiatives. And you need the right networking partner to provide you with that agility and flexibility and cost structure and security and visibility and control. So that really, for any of you that are willing to take a look and really go deep with, and we'll try and shortcut that with better messaging and better comparisons and easier ways to play with our solutions. But you'll find a pretty grave difference, a positive difference between the way the tools and control that we give versus others that exist out there.
So my next line of questioning, of course, I've got the big guy himself. I can't resist. I would love a sneak peek into what the future of Aviatrix looks like. Maybe short term, maybe long term. What's new and hot that's coming in terms of, where you want to take the company in the upcoming months or quarters in terms of, partnership developments, feature developments. What's in the mind of Doug in terms of what the next year or two of Aviatrix looks like?
Good question. So a couple of different themes that we're emphasizing. One, we've been pretty dramatically ramping up our partnering activity, going back to the heterogeneity and how complex this is. And some examples of that over the past couple of weeks, we announced an enhanced relationship with Megaport. We're continuing to enhance our relationship with Equinix. We've really been doubling down on how do we get closer to all the cloud players. We've really emphasized a lot more cooperation with AWS, with Azure, with GCP and others. I think that for our customers is really important because of how complex this world is and how we lean into partners and what that can actually do for their ease of use and their scale and their capability. Two, networking is complex, and there's a limited set of top-tier networking experts around the world. So we'll continue to invest in things like ACE, our awesome training and certification program to try and breed and build more cloud networking experts. But we're also working on ways to simplify our own offering. You'll see us come out with a as a service capability that takes elements of our offering that can be delivered as a service more effectively and elegantly. That generally doesn't include our data plane, which still needs deep customer involvement around it. But there's a bunch of other aspects around our control plane, our management plane, our analytics layer, and others, where I think that we could dramatically improve ease of use, deployment, manageability, et cetera. So that's the second big theme. So partner focus, ease of use is another big focus. the no show would be complete without someone mentioning generative AI and what's happening with the LLM landscape. I think there are two important elements for us there. One, as complex as the multi-cloud environment is today, with a number of big players, our view is the only way to really begin to capture and capitalize on this LLM movement is the big players will have their huge stake in it, but there are more and more specialty vendors that are emerging, the CoreWeaves of the world, the Groks of the world. They're building purpose-built data centers that really emphasize control and capability and focus, industry-oriented or others, around implementation of these different LLM capabilities. And then many organizations are also hosting their own, whether it's through Equinix or Megaport or in their own data centers. So that, I believe, will create a greater explosion of multi-cloud. It's not just how do you manage networking across Azure and AWS, if those are your two primary clouds, but I think we'll wind up with 8 or 10 or 20 or maybe even more of really important data centers that need to be connected with a high secure environment, effective encryption, high speed, high control. So we're continuing to work on our hybrid cloud footprint nature to alleviate that problem for folks, or to even allow them to make it a true differentiator for them. And then we also have got our own Gen AI activities. We've been focusing on different aspects of how do we lean on more traditional machine learning and AI to make networking more autonomous, more self-healing, more flexible and capable. And you'll see some interesting things from us in the coming semesters as we continue to iterate and experiment there as well. And then I don't want to leave behind the continued advancements in some of the core areas that we've been focusing in. How do we broaden some of our core networking capabilities so that we become even more robust in our routing and load balancing and some of the core networking aspects? And we've made some great inroads with our network security orientation. We've been doing NATM for a while. We came out with an FQDN and a bunch of other critical services. We came out with our distributed cloud firewall a year and change ago, which is gaining more and more traction. And we're going to continue to lean in hard on how do we make secure networking a hallmark of all networking, and certainly from Aviatrix. So we're not ignoring or leaving behind the focus on the features and functions across the networking stack that are so important to our customers and our prospects.
Excellent answer. All exciting, good stuff. We'll definitely have to have you back on the show maybe next year, and we can take a second look at how those initiatives are unfolding and how they're doing, but it sounds enticing indeed. So for our listeners, stay tuned. There's some really cool stuff coming around the corner from Aviatrix. You just heard from Doug himself. So it's a really cool time to be focused on the network and taking a look at what Aviatrix has to offer. I would agree.
There's definitely some cool stuff. And for all of you customers, what you probably noticed in the past year is we've been focusing a lot more on the ilities. So that, the foundational aspect, the importance of networking, and making sure that we're paying deep attention to installability, upgradability, maintainability, scalability, usability, all those ilities has been, I think, a really heavy rotation the past 12 to 18 months here at Aviatrix. And I feel really, I'm very proud of the teams and the work that they've done there. We're never done. Now, you can never have enough of the ilities. It's hard to differentiate on the ilities often because people expect all those things to be in place. But every technology, including the CSPs themselves, everyone has got more improvement to make across those ilities. And that's kind of the foundational focus of the entire product teams, product management, engineering, QA, release, et cetera.
So my last question is a question to you about the journey from a big data company to a big networking company. What that has been like for you. I think it's awesome. I know Ted Lasso was one of your heroes. And so I think it's cool to see inspiring leaders leave their comfort zone and go into something new, but with a strong set of ideals and principles that ends up carrying them through and winning the day, right? So I think a great leader can be successful in almost any environment he or she puts their mind to. And I think it's good to have outside perspective. But I'm just curious for you, what was it like ramping up, coming up to speed? I'm sure, you probably knew big data warehousing and analytics business analytics up one side and down the other. And then you find yourself, again, like Ted Lasso, at the head of a soccer team as a American football pro, or coach, I should say, here at the helm of a networking company. And you're probably looking around your first couple of months and going, okay, I better figure out what these people are talking about on the technical side.
Absolutely.
And so what was that journey like for you?
Humbling always. Like at the core, something that I deeply value personally is learning, growth, and development. It's been one of my kids are like, did you like school? Or like, I'm sick of school. It's like, I actually really enjoyed school. Like there were classes you don't always like and the pressure of getting the grades. But I just have always loved learning about new things. So jumping into a whole different area, it'd be very difficult for me, I think, to completely switch careers away from technology. But I did get a couple of years at Cisco, so learned a bit about networking. I had to relearn a lot here. But technology, ideally, technology execs, to be effective, I think, need at least decent awareness of all the layers of the stack. You can't just live at the applications layer or the data layer and pretend like nothing else exists, because it's a system. What Splunk provided was just it's just a portion of that super heterogeneous, both on the data landscape, but then up and down the OSI stack. Right? We were feeding the support of different technologists to make the systems work. The similarities that I found is all the LODs are always the same. Splunk has the same issues around scalability and maintainability and upgradability, et cetera. The audience that we served at Splunk, and that was just my latest, been lucky enough to serve lots of different audiences in my career. But the audience was really, I think, is very similar. We started as Splunk serving the IT ops team that really needed to be made cool again. They needed their stack to be made cool again, and they were the unsung heroes. We transitioned to the cyber teams that also have similarly difficult jobs as the network teams that we're driving here. So there's a lot of consistency in people that work their butts off, that have a degree of technical knowledge that a huge chunk of the world around them does not have, that we need to, if we let them down, it is of huge impact to the entire IT team within these different organizations. So I felt like there were a lot of similarities, but ultimately it meant a ton of listening. I made very, very few changes the first six months, because I spent all my time really talking to folks like you, and trying to understand, like, where do we come from? Where are we now? What do we believe? What's hard? What's not hard? What's working? What's not working? And I still put myself probably in step 2 of a 10 or 20 or 30 step journey of going as deep as I need to. But being open-minded, being inquisitive, being a big learner, listening like crazy. There's no way, there's so few networking companies that have gotten beyond any scale. We've been lucky enough to become a reasonably sized networking company with this industry. There's a lot more that we have to accomplish, but you don't get there by accident. So you better pay attention to the people that got you here, so you can figure out ways to tweak and tune and guide, and build on what's been done, instead of come in with your own ideas without enough listening.
Awesome. Well, Doug, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for making the time to come on Altitude and speak your mind and let us know all about what's going on with Aviatrix and why the network is the cloud and how IT people need to be recognized as the heroes they are. I mean, it's just been such a great inspirational episode. So really appreciate your time and wish you the best of luck with all the cool new stuff in the future.
Well, thank you, Eddie. It's always fun to get time together. And I'm sure I'll see you in meetings later this week.
Yes, I'm sure we will. All right. You take care. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You too.